At dawn on the 27th of August 1875, something is drifting in San Francisco Bay near Meigs Wharf. When it is pulled from the water, the city recognizes the face. William Chapman Ralston, founder of the Bank of California, and the kind of financier who treated San Francisco like a project that could be engineered into greatness. Only hours earlier, he had been pushed out of the bank he helped create. Now he is dead at 49, and the city is left staring at a question it cannot ignore. If a man this powerful can fall in a single morning, what else can fall? The grief turns public. Tens of thousands line the streets as his funeral procession passes. Thousands more pack a memorial meeting where speakers praise him as the greatest builder San Francisco has ever had. And somewhere behind the speeches, his widow and 4 children face a quieter truth. He wagered everything on dreams that were too large to be safe. Then the story delivers its cruelest contrast. Just a few blocks from where the Bay surrendered his body, a new hotel stands almost finished. Not a respectable hotel, the largest and most expensive ever built in the western United States. 7 stories high, occupying an entire city block, holding 755 guest rooms, built from roughly 26 million bricks. Ralston will never walk through its lobby as its creator. He will never see its gas-lit chandeliers glow over the grand court, or watch the first horse-drawn carriages roll beneath the glass skylight. But the Palace Hotel opens anyway. 2 months later, on the 2nd of October 1875, the doors swing wide, and the story of how that palace came to exist begins not with the man who financed it, but with the city that demanded it. Chapter 1. A city that refused to stay small. San Francisco also has a habit that will matter later. It rebuilds quickly because it has to. Early fires and storms teach the city that loss is not unusual, it is routine. So the city develops a particular personality, part optimism, part denial. People plan big because planning small feels like surrender. They gamble because the entire city was founded on a gamble. That personality becomes contagious. A merchant expands because the neighbor expands. A newspaper editor writes tomorrow's headline as if the city already deserves it. Investors back bold projects because bold projects are what get remembered. In a young city, memory is a kind of currency. And there is another truth beneath the glamour. A grand hotel is not just for outsiders. It is also for insiders who want a place to gather without having to build a mansion. It becomes a neutral stage where the city's wealthy can see one another, measure one another, and negotiate status. Influence in the 19th century is often exercised face-to-face. That means rooms matter. A palace hotel is a machine that manufactures those rooms at scale. So when San Francisco decides it wants a palace, it is not only copying the East, it is solving a practical need. A place big enough to host a city that is rapidly inventing its own elite class. Before the palace was a landmark, San Francisco was an argument with the map, an argument with distance, an argument with the old American idea that the country's true power lived only in the East. In the late 1840s, news of gold in California turns a distant port into a magnet. Ships arrive faster than buildings can be raised. Some crews abandon their vessels in the harbor and run inland. A city appears almost overnight, patched together with lumber, canvas, and impatience. San Francisco grows up fast, the way boom towns do. It learns commerce while it is still learning manners. It learns to build while it is still learning what building codes should be. It becomes rich while still being fragile, because speed and safety rarely mature at the same pace. But the city does not only want money, it wants legitimacy. It wants the kind of prestige that makes outsiders stop calling it a frontier outpost and start calling it a pier. That prestige has a language. Streets that look planned, institutions that look stable, rooms where important people can meet without apologizing for the rough edges of the young West. A grand hotel is one of those rooms. In the 19th century, a grand hotel is not merely a place to sleep. It is a stage where a city performs confidence. It is a machine that concentrates visiting wealth, political influence, and business opportunity in one address. If you can host the powerful in comfort, you can invite them to invest. If you can offer rituals of luxury that match New York or London, you can convince visitors that your city will still be here next year, and the year after that, and long after their money is spent. So the hunger forms. If you could stand on a hill above the city in the 1870s, you would see a place still negotiating its identity. Sailors, Merchants, laborers, and immigrants move through streets that are improving but still rough. Newspapers argue over politics and morality. Businesses advertise progress, as if repeating the word will make it permanent. This is why architecture becomes so emotional. In a city that changes quickly, a large building feels like a promise you can touch. It says, "We are investing in tomorrow with materials that do not blow away in a storm." But even then, San Francisco is never only a city of optimism. It is also a city of calculation. The people who build it understand that location is strategy. A hotel near the commercial heart is not placed there by accident. It is placed there to intercept money, influence, and attention. So when the palace is conceived, it is conceived as a tool. A tool for the city's reputation, yes, but also a tool for its economy. It will attract travelers who spend. It will concentrate meetings that generate deals. It will make the city look like a place where serious people can do serious business. San Francisco wants to be taken seriously. And in the 19th century, seriousness is often measured by how well you can host power. San Francisco wants a building that can say, without words, "We have arrived." Not a respectable inn, not a decent hotel, a palace. Chapter 2. The Man Who Financed Tomorrow. If you listen closely, you can hear two impulses fighting inside him. One impulse is civic pride, the desire to lift the whole city into modernity. The other impulse is competitive hunger, the desire to be the person who proves it can be done first and biggest. Those impulses create progress, but they also create exposure, because the bigger the project, the bigger the consequences when the mood turns. Ralston understands that when a city is growing, people do not only buy land and goods, they buy stories about the future. A banker can make that future feel real by making money available for projects that look inevitable once they begin. This is why Ralston becomes both admired and controversial. To some, he is the man who makes progress visible. To others, he is a man who ties the city's fate to risky bets. But in the Gilded Age, risk and progress often arrive together. If you want the skyline, you have to tolerate the scaffolding, and the scaffolding is financed by credit. The Bank of California grows in influence because it sits at the center of this logic. It is close enough to the mining frontier to act quickly, and powerful enough to demand favorable terms. It finances expansion, and expansion creates more deposits, which finances more expansion. In good times, this cycle looks like proof of genius. Yet every cycle has a weakness. A bank can be strong on paper and still be fragile in a panic, because paper assets cannot always be turned into cash quickly. Ralston is building a city on a foundation that is partly psychological, the belief that the cycle will keep turning. William Chapman Ralston arrives in San Francisco in the 1850s, and he immediately understands something about the West. The fastest fortunes do not always come from digging metal out of the ground. They come from financing the people who dig it, transporting the goods they need, and controlling the credit that decides whether a dream lives or dies. Ralston has the temperament of a builder, but not the builder who carries bricks. He is the builder who carries visions. He has the kind of confidence that makes other people feel confident, and that is a form of power. In 1864, Ralston helped establish the Bank of California alongside financier Darius Ogden Mills. Mills brings steadiness and experience. Ralston brings energy and ambition. A bank in San Francisco at this moment is not only a bank, it is a gate. It decides which businesses can expand, which projects can break ground, and which people can survive a downturn. A bank can turn a city into a network because it sits in the center of transactions that connect mines, merchants, rail lines, and real estate. Ralston uses the bank as a lever to modernize the city. He supports development, pushes big projects, and speaks about San Francisco as if it is already destined to be the Pacific's capital. He does not merely react to the future. He tries to schedule it. But a banker who wants to shape a city needs a stream of wealth. Ralston's genius is also his vulnerability. He thinks in scale, and scale demands constant momentum. A small project can survive a pause. A large project cannot. To keep a large machine running, you need steady fuel. In finance, that fuel is liquidity and belief. Liquidity means cash and reserves. Belief means depositors who do not panic and investors who do not stampede. Ralston lives in an era when public confidence can be shaped by newspapers, gossip, and the visible success of projects. A rising skyline convinces people the city is rising. A grand opening convinces people money is still flowing. In that environment, spectacle is not just vanity, it is strategy. The palace will become the largest spectacle of his career, and once you choose a spectacle, you must keep feeding it until it is complete. Stopping halfway looks like failure, and failure invites predators. So Ralston keeps going, even as risk accumulates underneath. This is why his story feels timeless. Modern cities still build monuments to confidence. Modern finance still depends on belief. The names change, but the physics of panic remain, large enough to sustain grand bets. In the 1860s and early 1870s, one stream shines brighter than all the others in the American West. Silver. Chapter 3. The Nevada Silver Engine. There is also a human cost to boom economies that is easy to overlook. Booms create work, but they also create dangerous work. Mining is brutal and risky. Construction is exhausting. Cities grow so quickly that workers are often asked to accept hazards as normal. This matters because the palace is built by labor that rarely appears in the glamour stories. Guests will remember chandeliers and lobby space. The people who carried materials and built walls will rarely be named in the stories told later. That is not unique to the palace. It is a pattern of the era, but acknowledging it makes the story more honest. A palace is never built only by money. It is built by hands. And the West is built by hands at the same time it is financed by banks. To picture the Comstock world, imagine a marketplace where information is as valuable as metal. A single report about a mine's output can move prices. A single rumor about a flood in a shaft can trigger fear. Men scan newspapers for share prices the way modern traders watch screens. This is why the Comstock era produces both wealth and manipulation. The Comstock also reshapes politics. Wealth on that scale attracts lawmakers, lobbyists, and rival factions who want to control what the metal will do for them. Railroads need financing. Cities need water and streets. New fortunes want social legitimacy. All of these demands collide in the same corridors where money is negotiated. That collision matters because it reveals what a bank really is in a boom. A bank is not only a place that holds deposits, it is a switchboard for an entire region. It connects the mining frontier to the urban center to national markets, and national markets to global perception. When that switchboard works, the region feels unstoppable. When it fails, the region feels suddenly isolated. So the Bank of California is not simply a company. It is an institution the city uses to feel secure. That is why its collapse will be experienced not only as economic pain, but as existential fear. In that sense, the palace and the bank are twins. One is a physical declaration. One is a financial declaration. Both depend on the same invisible ingredient, confidence. Booms attract opportunists. When large sums are at stake, people attempt to steer perception. They leak good news early, hide bad news, and sometimes exaggerate everything because exaggerated stories attract capital. A bank connected to this ecosystem inherits its volatility. Even if the bank believes it is simply providing stable financing, its balance sheet becomes tied to an industry that can change mood overnight. And because the distances are large, delays matter. A decision made in Nevada can reach San Francisco's ledgers before anyone has time to emotionally process what it means. In that sense, the Comstock is not only a mining story, it is a story about how the West becomes financially interconnected. The continent feels smaller because money travels faster than people. And when money travels fast, panic can travel fast too. Across the Sierra Nevada, in the mountains of what is now Nevada, miners strike a massive deposit of silver ore known as the Comstock Lode. The Comstock is famous because it is not just rich, it is rich enough to reorganize fortunes, politics, and entire financial systems. Mining at this scale is not romantic, it is industrial. Shafts go deep, pumps fight flooding, timber shoring holds back collapse. Mills crush rock, transportation moves heavy equipment and supplies across harsh terrain. Every step costs money before it yields profit. This is why banks become kings. A bank can decide which mine gets oxygen and which mine suffocates. A bank can decide which operator gets credit and which operator gets abandoned. And in a boom economy, credit can feel like magic. You borrow today, expand tomorrow, and assume the metal will pay you back. But credit is not magic. It is trust with paperwork. And in a boom, trust multiplies until it becomes fragile. The Bank of California becomes deeply involved in financing Comstock operations. Money flows from San Francisco to Nevada, and influence flows back. To manage this, Ralston relies on hard operators who can act quickly, far from the city's polite rooms. One of the most important is William Sharon, a figure tied to Comstock interests, who later becomes a United States Senator from Nevada. In this story, Sharon represents the era's sharp edge, disciplined, strategic, and capable of taking control when others hesitate. The Comstock boom makes people believe that yesterday's rise proves tomorrow's rise. Markets become stories told at speed. Rumors travel by telegram. Share prices move on whispers. In such a world, confidence is everything, and confidence can turn on a sentence. That is the hidden danger behind the palace. A building can be solid, but the financial mood that funds it can be a thin sheet of ice. Chapter 4. The Palace as a Declaration. The palace also represents a shift in what travel means. The West is no longer only for adventurers and prospectors. It is for businessmen, politicians, performers, and families who expect comfort. To host them, a city must provide not only transportation, but an experience that feels comparable to the world's established capitals. That is why the palace is designed to impress immediately. A big lobby is not wasted space. It is persuasion. It tells a guest that the city is organized and confident. It reassures investors that the city will protect their comfort and their deals. And outside the hotel, the project reshapes the neighborhood. Workers, deliveries, and constant construction traffic change daily rhythms. Businesses cluster nearby because prestige attracts customers. A grand hotel becomes an anchor, and anchors reshape the coastline of commerce around them. But the larger the anchor, the more it relies on unseen forces. The palace relies on the steady movement of money, and money in this era is moved by confidence. That is why the palace is both a triumph and a vulnerability. It announces permanence while being financed by a system that can lose belief in a single day. By the early 1870s, Ralston wants a monument that will make San Francisco impossible to dismiss. The idea of a grand hotel becomes a blueprint. The original Palace Hotel will occupy an entire city block near Market Street. It will rise 7 stories and contain 755 guest rooms. At the time, it becomes known as the largest hotel in the western United States. This is not modest architecture. It is civic theater. A hotel of that scale is also a complex machine. It must feed hundreds of guests, handle laundry, coordinate staff, manage water and waste, and maintain comfort in an era when comfort at scale is still new. A grand hotel sells certainty. It sells the illusion that everything is under control, even if the world outside is chaotic. Inside, guests see polished spaces. Behind the scenes, a hidden factory runs. Deliveries arrive. Kitchens work. Housekeepers turn rooms. Engineers keep systems functioning. A hotel is a city with schedules, and the schedules must work, or the illusion collapses. In the 19th century, hotels also showcase modern technology. Elevators, internal signaling systems, and new logistical methods appear early in grand hotels because luxury demands efficiency. So the palace is not only a palace in poetry, it is a laboratory where San Francisco tests what modern urban comfort can look like. But the palace is built during a financial climate that can turn cold without warning. The Panic of 1873 sends shockwaves through the United States. Credit tightens. Confidence becomes fragile. Even the Pacific Coast feels the chill of national finance. And a massive construction project has a problem. It does not pause just because markets feel nervous. The bills arrive on schedule. The wages must be paid. Materials must be bought. Money becomes the invisible scaffolding holding the project up. Ralston continues anyway. That is his nature. He believes boldness can bend reality. For a time, it seems he is right. The palace rises, story by story, until it begins to dominate the city's imagination. If you want to understand why people called it a palace, focus on the psychology of arrival. A traveler who crosses the continent in the 19th century arrives tired, dusty, and uncertain. The road is long, and the West can feel unfamiliar. Then they step into a grand lobby, and the world changes. Polished surfaces replace dust. Schedules replace uncertainty. Service replaces improvisation. That transformation is a product being sold. The palace is selling the feeling that the West is no longer wild. It is selling the idea that you can bring Eastern expectations to the Pacific Coast and be met with something equally refined. This is also why the building's location and scale are inseparable from the city's self-image. A palace on a full city block is not only a hotel, it is a statement that land here is valuable enough to devote to hospitality and display. It is a choice to prioritize reputation, and yet, because reputation depends on belief, a palace is always vulnerable to the very thing it tries to cure. If confidence slips, the monument can become a symbol of overreach. That is the risk Ralston accepts when he chooses scale. But as the building rises above the street, pressure rises inside the system financing it. Chapter 5. The Run and the Bay. To understand why a run is so deadly, remember what people expect from banks in this era. Many depositors treat the bank as if it were a locked chest with their name on it. They deposit money and imagine it sits there, waiting. But the bank does not operate like that. It lends, it invests. It uses deposits to fund projects that may take months or years to return value. In normal times, that is how economies grow. In panic, that structure becomes a trap. A crowd does not care that a loan might be repaid next month. A crowd wants cash today. So the bank is forced to admit a truth that was always there. It cannot satisfy everyone at once. This is why a bank run is both rational and irrational. Rational, because each individual fears being last. Irrational, because the collective action can destroy an institution that might have survived if everyone remained calm. But crowds rarely remain calm when they feel betrayed by their own assumptions. When the Bank of California collapses, the shock is not only financial, it is symbolic. If the largest institution can fall, then the city's narrative of unstoppable rise suddenly looks fragile. And Ralston, who embodied that narrative, becomes the human face of the collapse. In most collapses, the first thing that breaks is not money. It is trust. People do not need proof that a bank is insolvent to run on it. They only need to fear that other people might run first. A bank run is a crowd behavior, and once it starts, the line itself becomes evidence that something is wrong. In 1875, there is no federal deposit insurance. Safety nets are limited. A bank is only as stable as its reserves and its reputation. And a bank is not a vault. A bank is a system that lends and invests, holding only a fraction in reserve. So when fear arrives, depositors demand what the system cannot deliver fast enough: immediate cash for everyone. Footsteps do not pause. Paper rustles. Coins clink. People try to act normal while doing something desperate. Historical accounts agree on the central arc. The Bank of California collapses in late August 1875. Ralston loses control of the institution. And on the 27th of August 1875, his body is found in San Francisco Bay. Accounts differ on the precise cause. A run also has a strange social choreography. People in line watch one another, trying to read faces. Is that person calm because they know the bank is safe? Or calm because they got there early? Is that person nervous because they know something? Or nervous because everyone is nervous? The line becomes a rumor generator. Every sigh turns into a story. Every delay becomes evidence. And because the crowd is visible, fear becomes a public event. This is why institutions dread runs. They are contagious. They turn private anxiety into mass behavior. The tragedy is that the bank's assets are not necessarily worthless at that moment. Loans might still be repaid. Investments might still hold value. But value is not the same as liquidity. And a crowd demands liquidity. When the Bank of California fails, it does something more than collapse a balance sheet. It collapses a civic illusion that the city has achieved stability simply by growing fast. Growth is not the same as security. That lesson will repeat in 1906, when the city learns that a beautiful skyline is not the same as resilient infrastructure. Some describe a stroke during his regular swim. Others suggest suicide. What the record confirms is the date and the fact of his drowning. San Francisco responds as cities often do when a titan falls. The funeral procession is said to draw enormous crowds. The city mourns what Ralston represented: momentum, development, the feeling that tomorrow could be financed into existence. But beneath the mourning is fear. If the biggest bank can fail, what about the merchants, the payrolls, the ordinary depositors who believed the institution was a vault? A bank collapse is not a private tragedy. It is a shockwave through ordinary life. And here is the cruel symmetry. Even as the bank fails and the city mourns, the palace is nearly finished. The builder dies. The building is ready to live. In the days after the collapse, there is a second kind of panic that follows the first. It is not the panic of the line outside the bank. It is the panic of people at home asking practical questions. Will my employer make payroll? Will suppliers still deliver? Will rents be collected? Will the next business fail because the first one failed? This is how financial crises spread. They move from institutions into households. They turn abstract numbers into daily stress. For San Francisco, the timing is almost theatrical. A giant hotel is about to open, offering an image of stability, while the city is still absorbing a shock that reveals how unstable a boom can be. The palace therefore enters the world with an unusual kind of pressure. It is expected to be proof that the city can keep its promises, even when its bank just broke one. And yet the palace succeeds because it offers what a shaken public wants: a space where normal rituals can resume. People still want meals, meetings, and celebrations. They still want to believe the city will continue. A grand hotel gives them a place to enact that belief in public. Chapter 6. October 2, 1875. The doors open. Listen to what the palace is doing to time. Before such hotels, travel often means uncertainty. A missed connection, a delayed boat, a room that may or may not exist when you arrive. A grand hotel turns travel into something more predictable. It gives people schedules, staff, and a system designed to reduce surprise. That matters for business because business hates surprise. A banker might tolerate risk in investments, but not in basic logistics. So the palace becomes a tool for making commerce smoother. It creates a reliable place to host meetings, receive mail, arrange transportation, and signal seriousness to partners. This is why a hotel can quietly increase a city's economic power. It does not mine silver. It does not manufacture goods, but it makes the city more usable for people who control money. Opening the palace right after the collapse is also a kind of psychological counterattack. The city needs to prove to itself that it is still moving forward. A monument that opens on schedule becomes a public statement. The future is not canceled. That is why grand openings matter. They are rituals of confidence. They are moments when a city tries to synchronize its emotions around hope rather than fear. And once the doors open, the palace begins doing what great hotels do. It absorbs stories. It hosts quiet deals in corners where no one thinks to record them. It hosts celebrations that become family legends. It hosts arguments that change careers. A hotel is a crossroads, and crossroads collect consequences. In time, the palace becomes a kind of shorthand. To say you stayed there is to say you touched the city's center. To meet someone there is to meet them on a stage of prestige. The building becomes a social instrument, and like any instrument, it amplifies whatever enters it. On the 2nd of October 1875, the Palace Hotel opens. Imagine the first day. New plaster, fresh wood, a staff learning the choreography of service in corridors that feel endless, guests arriving with luggage, curiosity, and expectations. A grand hotel sells certainty. It offers routines that reduce travel's uncertainty. It offers meals on schedule, rooms prepared, service that feels immediate. In an era when travel can be brutal and unpredictable, a palace hotel is a promise that comfort can be manufactured. For San Francisco, opening the palace is a declaration. The city is saying, we are not a temporary camp. We are a capital. Behind the scenes, ownership shifts in the way it often does after financial collapse. In the aftermath, William Sharon acquires many of Ralston's assets, including the palace itself. The building begins with dual authorship. One man imagined it, another man ends up owning it. This is not just gossip. It is a key theme of the era. Visionaries take risks. Survivors collect the pieces. History is often written by both. The palace quickly becomes a center of gravity. Business meetings happen there because it is convenient and prestigious. Social events happen there because its rooms confer legitimacy. Visitors stay there, and their impressions become the city's reputation carried outward. A grand hotel edits a city for outsiders. As weeks become months, the palace becomes a place where the city meets the world. Foreign visitors judge the West by what they see in its most famous rooms. Business partners choose to meet there because it offers privacy without isolation, a public setting that still allows discretion. And the palace becomes a storyteller. People describe it in letters and newspapers. They boast about it. They use it as proof in arguments about San Francisco's status. That is the deeper reason the building matters after Ralston's death. A monument can continue telling the story its creator wanted told, even when the creator is gone. In that sense, the palace becomes Ralston's surviving voice. It is also why the building's later destruction will feel like more than a fire. When a symbol burns, it burns in the imagination too. It funnels visitors into a curated version of San Francisco. Polished, confident, modern, that curated experience becomes memory, and memory becomes reputation. In that sense, the palace does not only reflect San Francisco, it helps create it. Chapter 7. The Palace in its Glory and a King's Last Days. A building like the palace also shapes how power looks. In a grand hotel, small gestures become signals. Who is greeted first? Who is seated near whom? Who is invited upstairs? Who is asked to wait? That choreography is not trivial. In an era when deals rely on trust built in person, access to rooms can mean access to opportunity. A hotel that concentrates the elite accelerates the formation of networks. Networks then decide who gets financed, who gets introduced, and who gets invited into the next circle. So the palace does not merely host the city's wealthy, it helps organize them. At the same time, the palace sits in a city filled with people who do not share in the bonanza. Workers who build fortunes for others, immigrants who power commerce, and residents who struggle under rising costs. The palace is a celebration and a provocation at once. It is a symbol of what the city can offer the top layer, and that tension becomes part of San Francisco's long story. The death of King Kalakaua intensifies the feeling that the palace is larger than local glamour. A royal life ends far from home, and the place of that ending becomes part of international memory. In that moment, the palace's corridors become a kind of historical document, not because of ghosts, but because of fact. As the years pass, the palace becomes a stage for the city's elite life. It hosts banquets, meetings, and negotiations that never appear in newspapers. It becomes part of the city's nervous system, a place where the powerful practice being powerful. This is the Gilded Age in the West. Fortunes rise quickly and are spent loudly. The line between business and politics is thin. Influence is often exercised through presence, which means rooms matter. To be in the right room can be more valuable than owning a small mine. A grand hotel solves a social problem. Private mansions are exclusive and inconvenient for outsiders. A hotel creates neutral territory for the elite, a place where powerful people can gather without having to host. The palace becomes one of the rooms where the city decides what it will become next. The palace is sometimes remembered with a nickname that matches its era, the Bonanza Inn. Bonanza does not only mean wealth, it means a culture that believes the next deal will be bigger than the last. But history is never only local. It travels through corridors. In January 1891, King David Kalakaua of Hawaii comes to San Francisco. His health is failing. He stays at the Palace Hotel, far from the islands he rules. On the 20th of January 1891, King Kalakaua dies there. That single fact changes the hotel's meaning. A king dies in a suite in San Francisco. The palace becomes part of international memory. It is no longer only a symbol of wealth. It is a location where history can happen. As the century turns, San Francisco grows in power and complexity. By the time Kalakaua arrives, the palace is already woven into the city's identity. To stay there is to be associated with importance. So when a king dies there, the hotel becomes a kind of historical coordinate, a place people point to when they want to locate an event in the world. And notice how the palace's meaning keeps expanding. First, it is a business. Then it is a social stage. Then it becomes a location of international significance. That progression is common in famous places. Fame attracts events, and events deepen fame. This is why the palace story can be told without inventing anything. The facts are dramatic on their own, because the building sits at the intersection of power and travel. Power moves, and travel requires lodging, and certain addresses become magnets. By the early 1900s, the palace feels like one of those magnets that will never lose its pull. It is easy, in prosperous years, to forget how quickly a city can be humbled. Streetcars multiply, industry expands, downtown becomes denser. The city feels more certain of its permanence. But permanence in San Francisco is always conditional. The city sits near the San Andreas Fault. The ground carries strain like a silent secret. The city does not feel it day to day, but the strain is there, waiting. Chapter 8, 1906. The Earthquake and the Firestorm. One reason the 1906 fire spread so widely is simple. Cities are connected. Heat does not respect property lines. Smoke does not respect neighborhoods. And a failure in one part of an urban system can cascade into another. This is also why the disaster becomes a turning point in American urban history. It forces engineers and civic leaders to admit that a city is not only its buildings, it is its infrastructure. And infrastructure is what determines whether buildings can be defended. In 1906, many of the city's defenses fail at once. For the listener, remember this as you imagine the palace burning. The palace is not burning alone. It is burning as part of a citywide firestorm that rewrites streets, businesses, and lives. That larger context is what makes the loss of a symbol feel so total. The terror of an earthquake is not only physical, it is philosophical. It breaks the agreement people have with the world. Floors that were solid become questionable. Walls that were permanent become temporary. The city becomes unfamiliar in minutes. Then, fire introduces a second betrayal. Even if you survive the shaking, you might lose everything to flame. The disaster becomes layered. Shock, then smoke, then exhaustion. For firefighters, the failure of water pressure is a nightmare. They can see the enemy, but their primary weapon is unreliable. Improvisation becomes the only plan. And improvisation has limits when the scale is citywide. For civilians, the crisis becomes a sequence of choices that feel impossible. Do you stay and defend your home, risking being trapped? Do you leave early and potentially save your life but lose your possessions? Do you trust rumors about safe routes? Do you follow crowds or avoid them? This is why the fires of 1906 are remembered as much as the quake. The quake is sudden. The fire is relentless. It keeps forcing decisions long after the shaking stops. When the palace burns, it burns inside that larger reality, a city fighting not for comfort but for survival. April obsprezeche, omia noa sutashasa. In the early morning hours, a massive earthquake strikes the San Francisco Bay Area. The shaking is violent. Buildings crack. Streets buckle. Chimneys fall. The city is thrown into a moment of terrifying confusion. But the earthquake is only the first act. The second act is fire. Multiple fires break out across the city. The water system is damaged, leaving firefighters without reliable pressure. The blaze spreads, feeding on wood structures, broken gas lines, and the chaos of an unprepared urban environment. Some attempts to stop the fire involve dynamiting buildings to create fire breaks. And in some cases, the explosions scatter embers and ignite new fires. For residents, the disaster becomes a migration. People stream away from burning neighborhoods, carrying whatever they can hold. Blankets, ledgers, family photographs, children. Many carry nothing but shock. Public spaces become temporary cities. Parks fill with tents and makeshift shelters. Lines form for food and information. People search for familiar landmarks and find smoke instead. Now bring your focus back to the palace. The original palace suffers damage but does not immediately collapse. In the first act, it endures, but luxury has a vulnerability. Carpets, drapes, wooden trim, furniture, and finishes burn. A hotel is full of rooms that can become chimneys and corridors that can channel air. And when the city around a building burns, embers attack from every direction. The conditions of 1906 overwhelm normal solutions. Without water pressure, firefighters cannot hold a line. With winds carrying sparks across blocks, new fires ignite faster than old fires can be extinguished. Even a strong structure becomes exposed to a firestorm. The historical outcome is clear. The original Palace Hotel survives the initial shaking, but is destroyed by fire on the 18th of April 1906 in the disaster that follows the earthquake. San Francisco watches one of its greatest symbols turn into ash. When historians describe 1906, they often emphasize that the earthquake and the fire together made the disaster. That detail matters because it teaches a broader truth about risk. The first event can create vulnerabilities that make the second event catastrophic. A city might build for shaking and still lose to flame. A building might be strong against structural collapse and still be helpless without water pressure. Preparedness is not one feature. It is a web. The palace illustrates this painfully. It endures the first act, then succumbs to the second. So, the lesson is not that the palace was poorly built. The lesson is that a city must prepare for cascades, not single threats. That understanding is why San Francisco's post-1906 906 rebuilding eventually includes stronger systems and new approaches. The disaster forces the city to stop thinking of risk as an exception. Risk becomes part of the design brief, and that shift, from denial to design, is the true turning point of the palace story. And the city learns a lesson that will reshape its future. A city can build impressive architecture and still be defeated by infrastructure failure. Chapter 9. The Lesson of Water and Why the City Changed. Think about how unromantic that lesson is. It is not a lesson about courage. It is a lesson about pressure, redundancy, and planning for failure. A citywide emergency water network means there are alternative ways to deliver water when one path breaks. It means pumps, cisterns, connections, and fireboats can be integrated into a system rather than treated as improvisation. It means the city accepts that normal infrastructure can fail and builds a second layer designed for the worst day. In storytelling terms, this is where San Francisco stops treating disaster as a surprise and starts treating it as a recurring cost of living on the Pacific Edge. That shift is what makes the later palace and the later city harder to erase. The most important thing about the water lesson is that it turns memory into engineering. Cities often say they will never let a disaster happen again, but saying it is easy. Building the infrastructure that makes it less likely is hard. San Francisco's response is practical and expensive. An independent firefighting water system is not glamorous, and most tourists never notice it. But it is one of the most meaningful consequences of 1906 because it acknowledges a truth. Bravery is not enough without systems. This is also a reminder that disasters reveal hierarchy. Some neighborhoods burn faster because they are built differently. Some communities recover slower because they have fewer resources. When infrastructure fails, inequality becomes visible in the smoke. The palace, as a symbol, is often told as a story of luxury. But as a historical event, its loss is part of a broader human story. Thousands of lives disrupted, neighborhoods erased, and a city forced to decide what to rebuild first and why. So Chapter 9 is not a detour, it is the hinge. It explains why the palace's return is more than sentimental. It is part of a citywide decision to treat resilience as policy. After 1906, San Francisco does not only rebuild buildings, it rebuilds ideas about preparedness. One of the most painful truths of the disaster is simple. Fire is not only fought with courage, fire is fought with water pressure. In 1906, broken mains and damaged infrastructure make reliable pressure impossible across large parts of the city. Firefighters improvise, draft from whatever sources they can, and still watch flames run through neighborhoods faster than any human line can stop. This is why, in the years that follow, the city treats water as a defense system. San Francisco eventually builds the auxiliary water supply system, completed in 1913, an independent high-pressure network dedicated to firefighting in emergencies. It is the kind of infrastructure most visitors never notice. But it is one of the reasons later crises are met with more preparation than panic. This matters for the palace story because the palace is proof that landmarks do not stand alone. A landmark depends on pipes, streets, budgets, trained responders, codes, and maintenance. The original palace could not be saved in 1906 because the city system around it was failing. So the story of the palace is also a story about systems. A bank is a system of trust. A mining boom is a system of belief and leverage. A city is a system of infrastructure. When the system fails, even the most beautiful symbol can fall. But systems can learn, and a city that learns can rebuild with stronger defenses. The auxiliary water supply system is a reminder that cities learn in layers. A disaster exposes one weakness, and a city responds by strengthening that point. Then time passes, and new weaknesses emerge. In 1906, the weakness is water delivery under shock. So the city builds a separate network, with high pressure and independent lines meant to remain usable when the ordinary system is damaged. It is a technical answer to a historical trauma. This kind of response is important because it changes the story from fate to responsibility. If a city can build better systems, then disaster is not only something that happens to you, it is also something you prepare for. Preparation does not guarantee safety, but it changes probabilities, and probabilities are what public policy is made of. The palace fits into this logic because it is a landmark people wanted to save, but could not. In 1906, it is lost. Afterward, the The city invests in making future losses less likely. So the palace becomes part of the motivation for invisible infrastructure that protects countless other buildings later. A single famous loss can justify a system that saves many ordinary places in the future. Chapter 10. The Return. 1909. And the city's promise to itself. The rebuilding years also changed the city's relationship with memory. When you lose a neighborhood, you lose more than property. You lose routines, meeting places, the small geography of daily life. So survivors begin to measure recovery not only in new construction, but in the return of ordinary habits. This is why hotels matter again, in a practical way. A city trying to recover needs places where visitors can stay, where businesses can gather, and where contracts can be signed. Recovery requires coordination, and coordination needs rooms. The palace, even before it fully returns, functions as an idea that organizes hope. People can disagree about politics, money, and blame, but they can still agree that rebuilding a landmark signals capability. A landmark is a public promise with a visible deadline. When the deadline is met, it tells the city, we can still execute. That is the quiet power of a grand reopening. It is not only for tourists, it is for residents who need to feel that the city has a future that can be planned. So when the new palace opens in 1909, it is not just a hotel returning, it is the city returning to itself. Not the same self, because 1906 is never forgotten, but a self that has proved it can absorb trauma and still produce a functioning society. That is why the palace story is often told as a story of resilience. Not because resilience is a feeling, but because resilience is what recovery looks like when it is translated into schedules, budgets, and completed buildings. Rebuilding is never only technical, it is emotional. After the fires, ruins become meeting points for grief. People do not only count losses in money, they count losses in familiar shapes. A skyline is a kind of home, and when the skyline changes overnight, the mind struggles to accept it. That is why landmarks matter in recovery. They are not just pretty, they are stabilizing. They tell residents, you still belong to a place with an identity. They tell the world, this city is not merely an aftermath. The baby palace is a practical bridge, but it is also a signal. The name will not die. And when the new palace opens in 1909, it carries the energy of a city refusing to be defined by ash. The return does not erase the trauma of 1906. Nothing can, but it does something equally important. It turns trauma into forward motion. It gives the city a place to gather again, and gathering is one of the first steps toward normal life. After a catastrophe, a city does not only rebuild structures, it rebuilds confidence. San Francisco needs signs that it can recover. Symbols matter. A symbol lost can feel like a wound. A symbol restored can feel like a promise. But rebuilding takes time, and life does not pause. Travelers still come. Business still needs rooms and meeting spaces. So a temporary solution appears. A smaller facility, often called the Baby Palace, is built as accommodations until a new permanent palace can be completed. Even that temporary name matters. The city insists on continuity. It insists the palace will return. On the 19th of December 1909, a new palace hotel opens on the same site. The new palace therefore carries a double purpose. It must be impressive, because the city still wants prestige. But it must also be reassuring, because the city has learned what it feels like to lose everything. That balance shapes the tone of the rebuilding era. San Francisco rebuilds boldly, but with a new awareness that boldness must be engineered, not merely announced. It is a city growing up under pressure. The palace's return becomes one of the clearest markers of that maturation, not because the hotel solves all problems, but because it signals that the city is capable of continuity. Continuity is what investors and residents need after trauma. It tells them the future is back on schedule. The new building belongs to a new San Francisco, one that has seen flames and is now designing with disaster in mind. The return is not only a reopening, it is a statement to the world. The city has not been erased. A rebuilt palace pays in a currency more valuable than comfort. It pays in belief. It tells residents they still live in a functioning city. It tells investors the city is stable enough to plan. It tells visitors the city can host them again. And it carries the memory of 1906, like a hidden blueprint. Beauty must be backed by resilience. A palace cannot pretend the worst day is impossible. It must be engineered for it. Chapter 11. The Survivor, 1923 to 1991, and the Meaning of Return. Preserving a historic building in an earthquake city is a modern form of courage. It requires admitting risk without surrendering to it. Engineers translate beauty into numbers. They calculate forces that most people never think about. They reinforce without making the building look reinforced. The work is expensive, technical, and meant to disappear once finished. That is why the 1989 closure matters. It is not only renovation, it is a decision to keep history alive in a city that could easily replace it with something new. And when the Loma Prieta earthquake strikes in October 1989, the story becomes almost painfully consistent. The palace is again caught in the rhythm of San Francisco: build, shake, repair, return. The difference is that the modern city has more tools, more knowledge, and stronger systems than it had in 1906. The reopening in 1991 is therefore not just hospitality, it is policy made visible. It is proof that a city can learn and then spend money on what it learned, which is the only kind of learning that changes outcomes. This is why the palace is best understood as a living archive, not an archive of paper, but an archive of decisions. Every reopening is a new line in the record. Every retrofit is a note in the margin. A grand hotel becomes a crossroads. Diplomats, industrialists, and travelers pass through. Local elites gather in public spaces. Tourists come to see famous rooms. Over decades, the palace becomes part of San Francisco's identity, not because it is flawless, but because it persists. In late July 1923, President Warren G. Harding arrives in San Francisco during a Western tour and stays at the Palace Hotel. His health deteriorates. He dies there on the 2nd of August, 1923. At the time, the death is attributed to a heart attack, and no autopsy is performed, leaving room for speculation. Regardless of rumor, the historical fact remains. A sitting president dies at the palace, and the address becomes part of national memory. Time passes. The palace ages, but it remains a landmark. And in a city built on seismic risk, aging landmarks face a modern question. Can they be kept? And can they be made safe? By the late 20th century, San Francisco knows it will shake again. Building codes evolve. Engineers strengthen structures. Budgets become arguments, because preparedness always competes with other desires. But the physics do not negotiate. The ground will move again. So, in January 1989, the Palace Hotel closes for major renovation and seismic retrofit. This is not cosmetic. It is structural work meant to preserve a historic building without erasing its identity. Then, on the 17th of October 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake strikes the Bay Area. The palace is already closed, but the quake still damages the structure and complicates the restoration. And once again, the pattern repeats. The palace is tested. The city responds by rebuilding, not abandoning. After extensive work, the hotel reopens in early April 1991. There is also a quieter reason the palace keeps returning. People want anchors. In a city that changes constantly, a landmark provides orientation. It gives residents a sense that not everything is temporary. That human need is one reason preservation matters. Preservation is not freezing the past. It is keeping certain pieces of identity available for the living. So when the palace reopens after retrofitting, it does more than reopen a business. It restores an anchor. It makes the city feel like itself again. And that returns us to the simplest summary of the entire timeline. A bank collapses. A palace opens. A city burns. A palace returns. History passes through. The ground shakes again. The palace returns again. The story endures because the pattern is recognizable. Loss and return. Shock and repair. Confidence rebuilt not by slogans, but by work. The reopening is a quiet kind of victory. Not over an enemy, but over time. Over decay. Over the tendency of cities to discard their past. Now return, one last time, to the Bay. On the 27th of August, 1875, the Bay holds the body of William Chapman Ralston. That day marks the collapse of a bank and the end of a man who tried to finance the future. On the 2nd of October 1875, a palace opens anyway. It opens as if refusing to admit fear can have the final word. It burns in 1906. It returns in 1909. It becomes a place where a king dies and a president dies. It closes to be strengthened, is shaken again, and returns once more. So the palace is not only a symbol of luxury, it is a symbol of return. San Francisco, more than many cities, understands that permanence is not a given. Permanence is something you negotiate with nature, with economics, and with time. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes you rebuild in a way that carries memory forward. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest. The bank run of 1,875, the fire of 1,906, or the palace's return after the ashes. And if you want more true historical storytelling like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next episode. Your support helps decide what story we tell next. Thanks for listening today. The end.